Lumos.
Let's pull out our wands and light the tips, but we're not blowing smoke. We're here to illuminate. Well, let's talk about Filtch for a minute. Let me rewind you back just a little bit to how this chapter started. He sees his cat hanging on the wall and starts freaking out, immediately going after Harry, apparently about to get violent with this kid, as all stable adults should. Remember when I said that earlier? But then he's stopped by Dumbledore from physically assaulting a child. I said that too. And then I said this. This is the kind of shit that brings credence. Credence? Fantastic Beasts? Aurelius. What a dumb plotline. Anyway, this is the kind of shit that brings credence to the Super Carlin brother theory that Christina and I were talking about in last episode, where they theorize that Filch is actually a poltergeist. Just like Peeves, but like the complete opposite. Where Peeves is a manifestation of rule breaking at Hogwarts and that energy of kind of mischievous children, a la Fred and George energy, Filch is a manifestation of rule following, and I guess the energy of children who are on the straight and narrow and don't like it when people break the rules, a la Percy. But the reason I say this and why I think this type of scene really brings that theory to life for me personally is the short temper that Filch has. And these, like, violent tendencies. We see more of it, this weird infatuation with physically harming children in the Order of the Phoenix. We saw it in the first book in Sorcerer's Stone when he's taking them out to the forest and he's talking about how it's... What am I trying to say? And for some reason, right in this moment, I can't remember how it's written exactly in the books, but I do remember the movie portrayal of it. And so since that's a fairly decent adaptation, particularly for this series, it sticks out in my brain how the one line specifically that the actor delivers where he's like, "Oh, I miss the screaming." That kind of shit. That's the kind of shit that I'm talking about here. And in Order of the Phoenix with Umbridge in charge, like he's talking about wanting to hang children by chains. Like, it's crazy. He wants to whip them. He wants to, like, physically abuse children. Dumbledore wouldn't employ this guy. He would have been fired so long ago if he could be fired. In my mind, even Dumbledore's whimsical, quirky ass wouldn't allow a janitor with involvement in punishment to do this job if they got off on the idea of torturing children. But if you notice, as many references the Filch character makes to wanting to punish the kids, we never actually see it happen. Not that I can remember. He monitors some detentions and he escorts them to detention and he oversees some of the punishments that are set by teachers. But I can't remember a single time that he actually is the authoritative figure that punishes the student. I could be wrong. We're only, halfway through the second book rereading this series. I could have forgotten something, but I can't remember one. For my money, there's something to the theory. He didn't punish them because he couldn't. Because he wasn't an actual employee. He wasn't even an actual person. It was a poltergeist. But if it was a poltergeist, could it have actually done anything to the students? Like, physically? Like, I'm asking, what are the limitations to the interaction that poltergeists can have with physical and living objects, with how they're not living, but they're also not ghosts. I guess we know that Peeves could interact with the physical world and do shit like drop giant vanishing cabinets, which also brings up how strong are these things? Did Peeves like carry that shit over his head or just like push it over? And if they are super strong and can physically manipulate objects, what about the interaction with human form? I know we get weird shit where like Peeves is farting in kids' faces and he's dancing and he's singing to them and he's flying around them and he's really annoying. But I can't remember a moment where he actually physically touches a student. And it makes me wonder if he could, or it could, if Peeves as a poltergeist, it could have actually made physical contact with a student. I don't know. If they can, and they're super strong, maybe Filtch is even scarier? If he can actually physically touch a student and has super strength and is apparently a sadist, like, that's terrifying. But aside from that, what's the thing with Mrs. Norris? Like, why would she take to Filtch so well or so closely if Filtch is a poltergeist? I know there's those other theories out there where, like, where Mrs. Norris is actually an animagus that got stuck, or is perhaps a, what's the thing that they say that Nagini had? Oh gosh, this is fantastic beast canon, but it's the maledictus thing, where they are doomed to turn into an animal. Like, they basically have an animagus form throughout life, but eventually it's going to take them over. Like, they're going to turn into that animal and never be able to turn back. It's like a blood curse or whatever from birth. But there's a theory that that Mrs. Norris is possibly one of those two things, the animagus gone wrong or the maledictus version, and was actually Filch's wife, and that's why they're so close and have this type of relationship that they have in the human with cat form. But obviously that doesn't hold up if Filch is a poltergeist. So I don't know. I guess your answer to one theory is kind of your belief in the other, possibly. If you really subscribe to the Mrs. Norris animagus gone wrong maledictus type of theory, you probably don't think Filch is a poltergeist. If you think that Filch is actually a poltergeist, the opposite of Peeves, and really a manifestation of the castle, and not a living, breathing human, never was a living, breathing human, you probably don't think that Mrs. Norris was ever Filch's wife. So that's fun. I guess let me know what you think. You can, is there anything to this, or do you lean one way or another with those two theories? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And again, shout out to Super Carlin Brothers for the theory that kind of took us down this rambling rabbit hole to begin with. So let's do some divination. It's time to highlight 4 moments in the chapter that foreshadow something to come in the future. First, Ginny Weasley seemed very disturbed by Mrs. Norris's fate. According to Ron, she was a great cat lover. That was a quote from early in the chapter, and then we get more with her later with Percy about how she was very upset, crying her eyes out to Percy about how Ron and the trio are going to get expelled, and this is all just a kind of combined foreshadow of what we talked about in the last episode with Christina, how Ginny's not doing good. And this is really where we start getting peppered in more and more and more about her character and about what she's going through in this year. In Chapter 8, the Death Day party, we get one quick little hint, one quick little mention of Ginny and her current state, and it's kind of hidden in she might have the flu or a cold or whatever because all the students are sick. But now in this chapter, we're really starting to get it. The author is really starting to lay it out that she's not doing well this year, and it's sort of red herringed, I guess. Maybe it's a red herring. Maybe that's how you say that. Like trying to lead us down the trail of Ginny is just really upset with what's going on because of how it, she loves cats and how it could affect her family, and she's just not. She's scared about the Chamber of Secrets and all of this stuff, when really we know she's losing time, and she's been being possessed by a teenage diary Voldy soul Tom Riddle, and she's the one that's actually doing all this stuff. And she's, I think, at this part we're not meant to, but on a reread we can see she's starting to put that shit together in her own head, and it's freaking her out. 2. After a hurried lunch, he went upstairs to meet Ron in the library and saw Justin Finch Fletchley, the Hufflepuff boy from Herbology, coming toward him. Harry had just opened his mouth to say hello when Justin caught sight of him, turned abruptly, and sped off in the opposite direction. Again, another direct quote from the chapter, and this is a pretty clear foreshadow with Justin Finch Fletchley that he is afraid of Harry. It's foreshadowing the school's rumor and belief that Harry is the heir of Slytherin. That's going to come very, very quickly in this chapter, but also it's kind of a foreshadow to the Dueling Club chapter where Justin Finch Fletchley becomes center of attention for one very, very angry snake, and how everything goes down there, which we're not going to get into too deeply because, like I said, we have that in 2 chapters from now, and we'll have, for fuck's sakes, with us to talk through that whole debacle, because let me tell you, I have feelings on that one. 3, the bell rang. Ron and Hermione led the way to History of Magic bickering. And this foreshadow is just kind of fun. We've got a lot of dark shit in this chapter in particular with these foreshadows. A lot of dark, a lot of plot happening, a lot of fear in the castle right now. So I kind of really like this little just dropped in foreshadow Easter egg of Ron and Hermione bickering at each other, because not only are we going to get that for 5 books after this, it's also what I imagine their relationship is like into adulthood when they're married and have kids and happily ever after, constantly bickering. Foreshadow number 4, another quote: Dumbledore couldn't cure Mrs. Norris, and that makes me think that whatever attacked her might not be, well, human. Hermione said that. And she's absolutely right. It's a foreshadow to what Slytherin's monster actually is, which we all should honestly have caught on to much sooner. Maybe some people did when they were reading this, but I don't believe I was one of them the first time I read this book. I wasn't seeing giant snake slithering through the pipes and coming out of sinks and toilets and stuff. That's not what I thought was where we were going with this. I'm just going to say that. But that's where we're headed. It's a giant snake attacking, and that is why Dumbledore can't cure with just, his own simple magic these petrifications, because they're from a freaking basilisk. This cat's lucky to be alive, and so will the humans be coming up. And that's it for foreshadowing with this one. So let's give away some
house points.
In true Hogwarts fashion, these points are completely subjective, with no oversight, and they're fully at my discretion. This week, I'm giving house points to Dumbledore, getting 5 for saving Harry from Filch's wrath in this chapter. I'm going to give Hermione 5 as well for... I'm just going to wrap everything up that she does in this chapter and say for being smart, as usual. Percy. Yeah, I said that. Percy. I'm giving points to Percy, which I never thought was going to happen. I'm actually giving him 10 for trying to protect his little brother and caring for his baby sister in his own brand, of course, but still sibling love. Now it's time to take away some house points, and I'm going to take away 15 from Dumbledore for employing Filtch. If we assume that Filch is not actually a poltergeist, then Filch is an employee of this school and is a sadist, and Dumbledore lets him keep working there. That's worth 15 points, I think. Snape is losing 5 for, well, just for being a dick. Filch is losing 50 for literally every moment he exists in this chapter because he's awful the whole time. And Ron is going to lose 5 points for being a dick to Percy, which is, like I said, a stance I never thought I was ever going to take. I will add these points and subtract them in the right cases to my nerdy spreadsheet as soon as I create it and tally them up for the end of this season's Bingy Awards episode. Before we go, we have to acknowledge the moments in this episode, well, in this chapter. I don't know why I tend to say in this episode, because really, it's the chapter that has these moments. The episode, we're just talking about them. So, before we go, let's acknowledge the moments in this chapter that were utterly
ridiculous.
It's not an episode of The Binge if we don't call out what didn't make any sense. Starting with, well, okay, before we even get into stuff, there were a lot for me. I have a lot of gripes about this chapter, and we've talked about a lot of it already. I think if you need to think back or rewind back to earlier in the episode, if I say something along the lines of, whatever, or, yeah, okay, sure. Things like that, pretty safe to assume that it's going to end up here. So we're going to go through this one pretty quick and move on with our day. Filch threatening a student with violence and still having a job, assuming he's not a poltergeist, obviously, as I've mentioned now multiple times, is ridiculous. So is him screaming at Dumbledore and Dumbledore just letting that go. Snape trying to slide in and get Harry kicked off of Quidditch during this legit life and death kind of serious situation, and we're supposed to give a shit about Quidditch. Because Quidditch, I guess. Ridiculous. How quickly the school blames Harry for being the heir of Slytherin is ridiculous and is only going to get worse as the book goes on. How the trio just stumbles onto the scene of where this all went down like it's some kind of happy accident. Ridiculous. Remembering water on the floor from that... What? Ridiculous. There's a lot here that just screams book written for children, and that my just ancient ass shouldn't be reading nearly as close as I am. But that's just some of them, and I'm going to leave it at that. With that, we have reached the end of this episode of Belated Binge. As always, shout out to producer Jack, who I work like a dog. Remember to follow and subscribe to the show on whatever podcast player you're using right now, and if it supports a rating and review option, please leave one. You have no idea how much that can possibly help. And if you're so inclined, go to patreon.com/belatedbinge, and check out the additional benefits that I have there. There are some bonus episodes that are banked there, and a whole bunch of stuff that you can get by signing up for Patreon. I also have a goal of getting to 10 total patrons, at which point I will start a Discord server, and I would just really love to have your support over there. And honestly, I would love to do the things that are promised as benefits there. So go ahead and give it a gander if you would. Patreon.com/belatedbinge. If you're reading along, next episode we will cover chapter 10 of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, The Rogue Bludger. Until then, I'll see you next time on the Belated Binge Podcast. Hard to see why we'd want the book, really, said Ron, if we weren't going to try to make one of the potions. I think, said Hermione, that if we made it sound as though we were just interested in the theory, we might stand a chance. Oh, come on. No teacher's going to fall for that, said Ron. They'd have to be really thick.